I presume the person that you fall in love with is not close to you. And I think there's two ways, right? There's the one of we've met in person, but we are far away. There's the other, which is we've met online or we've met through some other way. So we've always been far away. And then you also have sort of like the temporary long distance relationships, meaning when work brings you away, right? So what are the advantages of being in a long distance relationship and what would actually make it worth it?
The advantages is like you don't have to be annoyed with the little things that your partner does all the time.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Interracial Couple Podcast.
Where it's not all black and white. My name is Sarah.
And I am Matthew. And we are going to have fun today talking about the trials, tribulations, and maybe perhaps a little bit of insight on long-distance relationships, or LDRs, and how to make a healthier relationship when you are far away from each other.
Yeah. Have you ever been in a long-distance relationship?
Like an actual relationship, no, but I worked on fostering a romantic interest from far away for quite a while. But I was really young. I think one of the things that I recognized though too, kind of looking back, was how much fantasy in some ways there was in what did it mean to me, or what did I envision that it could be, as opposed to what it was, because what it was someone who was on the other side of the world. What about you?
I kind of had a fling. I won't call it a relationship necessarily, but it was a fling. And I feel like I've always known that I'm not someone who could do long distance relationship. So I guess my other question is since I knew that for myself, do you think that some people, maybe based on their personality, that they can do it and other people can do it?
I'm guessing that it's very different for a lot of people, because sometimes it's simply circumstantial.
Yeah. And I think mostly it's circumstantial.
I presume the person that you fall in love with is not close to you. And I think there's two ways, right? There's the one of we've met in person, but we are far away. There's the other, which is we've met online or we've met through some other way. So we've always been far away. And then you also have sort of like the temporary long distance relationships, meaning when work brings you away, right? So, I know an actress who I worked with, and she talked about how difficult it was because she was a very well-known working actress, and she would go away for months at a time to be on location. And then this coming back into a relationship with her husband, she said, was just always so challenging, because they had to kind of refit, and it was a constant thing, and they'd been married for a long time. It did not necessarily get easier, even though they loved each other, they had children together, they'd been together for a long time. So distance is definitely something that needs to be managed, I think, in a relationship.
Yeah, I remember that one time where I was gone. I don't know who was gone. But I just remember coming back and feeling like this. I had a little bit of anxiety going on. We met, and I think I was back in the States, and I left you in Kenya, and I came back and we went on a date night because we hadn't seen each other in a couple months. And I just remember it being the first few minutes were kind of awkward. It was so funny because I'm never awkward around you. It almost kind of felt like we went back to our fast date.
Right. Right there. And there was some excitement in the unknown, right? Is this as good as we remembered it? Are things going to be better? Are they going to be worse?
I have to say there was some integration of so how has the last couple of months been for you without me? That conversation, it was just I just remember it being a little awkward.
Yeah. And I think that's really probably an important thing in a long distance relationship, because while I haven't been in a bona fide long distance relationship, I guess it was 2019, right? Where, gosh, what a weird time warp things have been lately. But early in the year, you were gone for 2 months. And then a little later in the year, I was gone for nearly a month, and then again for nearly a month. So out of a 12-month period of time, we were physically apart for 4 of those months. And so there were these pieces of how do we give each other enough space to say, hey, you know what, enjoy your separateness from me, your autonomy. You get to do whatever you want. within the agreements of the relationship, of course. And I get to do the same. But then how is the checking in? What is this kind of, what are the agreements? And I think when it comes down to it, the agreements become really important, and then also the tending to, because like when we're together, we tend to our relationship fairly regularly, right? It's kind of part of what we do, even if it's like, hey, we're just checking in while we're making dinner. But we don't get that check-in time when we're not in the same space.
Yeah, we don't. I remember actually almost kind of feeling needy when I was in LA because I wanted to talk to you more. And also the time difference was like so weird because I would have had my day where I was, doing my thing and working. And in the evening, I would want to check in with you, which is your morning, and you're doing your morning routine and you are starting your day, and you not necessarily want to start with your day with our conversation about how my day was. And I just remember like feeling like there was a little bit of kind of felt like you don't want to talk to me. But I also were at that point in our relationship, like I knew how you do your mornings, and like you have a morning routine and you don't do phone calls in the morning and you necessarily don't want to be on the phone. But I also kind of was like, but I also want to talk, So it made me feel a little bit of like I was becoming a little needy.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was walking and you'd want to talk and I'm like, I'm in the middle of something,
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah. You're in your evening. If you were also, if you were out with people, or in your morning, you're like, oh, I'm going to so-and-so's house and I'm going to be doing this and that. And I'm like, well, can we have a few minutes? Because my day is over. Nice time just to check in. You're like, I'm sorry, I'm running out the door. I don't have time right now. And I think that also plays into some of the question of, I want to say boundaries, but actually being clear. That way both people's needs are met, because that's a very different thing. Also, when you're traveling, like one of the times when I was gone during that year, like I was backpacking and I was out and I was seeing people I hadn't seen in a long time. We were actually in a similar time zone. We were only up by one time zone. But your evening, you're kind of like winding down, but I'm visiting with people I haven't seen in many years. So for me, it's like, sorry, the evenings, I don't have time. I'm out. I'm going to parties. I'm going out to eat with friends and whatever.
Yeah.
So when you and I got together, early on, you asked me, would I consider moving to Kenya?
I did. And you said yes.
I did say yes.
And so we moved.
So our relationship actually was a long distance relationship. It's just that the long distance was not between us, but the distance we traveled together to get to our new home.
I think for me, it also had to do with age, like where I was and the kind of relationship that I wanted. I just knew that I wasn't going to make this move. It wasn't a consideration. Like I wasn't going to move to Kenya by myself, like leave a man in the US and I moved to Kenya. I also didn't know like how long I was going to move to Kenya, like how many years I wanted to be there. Like it was like, we have something serious, you're coming with me, or we just don't, So you made it very easy for me when you said yes.
Right. But that can be really hard for a lot of people, because if we were really in love, which we were, but I had a career that was humming and things were going great, like, I had a career and it was going fine, but I'd also kind of come to a good stopping place, as it were. Like I finished a couple of projects just before we moved. So it was kind of this perfect time. But the other thing would have been, well, what happens when you're the right person, I'm the right person, but the situation for us to be together in that moment isn't right? Is that a way of saying, you know what, this isn't right for right now? Or how do we develop these things while we're apart? And one of the things we noticed actually when we first started sharing the Lover's Journal with people was how many people who learned about it were like in long distance relationships and wanted to have something to build that connection over distance.
Yeah.
Because like, how do you make something really intentional? Because you can get on the phone like, oh, we talk for an hour or two, and that's fun for the first 3 months, maybe the first 6 months. But at a certain point, like lying in bed just talking onto the phone to your person and you love, like, it's not sustainable in the long run for building something into the future. It's a great thing to start, like, but to me right now, if my evenings were like just being on the phone with you for an hour and a half, that would not be fulfilling, because it's almost like directionless, which is great early in a relationship.
Yeah, I thought just occurred to me. Maybe we're looking at long distance the wrong way. Like for a long time, and for most people in the world, is like they actually practice long distance relationship. Just because think about it, like there's work in the town. So most people leave and go work in the town, maybe not in the Western world. But when I think about Kenya, is that the men work in the city and the women stay in the village, or they get work in the next town and they can't come home. And I just feel like maybe we have the wrong expectation about communication and how many times you need to talk. Like for me, when I was back, I wanted to talk to you every evening or every other evening. Like maybe we don't need to do that.
Well, we don't necessarily, but there are two parts of that story. One is the relationship that's like we are married and we built a family, and yet I have to go away to work, like the actress friend I was speaking about, right? Yeah. Like my job is going away for long periods of time, but we have a family unit and we built a life together. The other is when you don't have that. You're maybe earlier in your life, in your 20s or something, and you're like, that you don't have that, or you've had a family already and maybe you're divorced and going into a new relationship, and now you don't have that same foundation that you're building towards. So I think those are very, very different things. If I was going away now at this point and I was going to be gone for 2 months for work, it would be a very, very different thing than 2 years ago.
Correct. So I guess like long distance relationship also depends on like where you are in your relationship and what stage, then it's a very different conversation. Is there even a long distance relationship when you build a family unit?
Yeah, I think that's a different classification, but kind of coming back to, because I think there are a lot of people who are like actually in love and they live far away from each other. And they know they want to be together and they know they love each other, but the circumstances are keeping them away. What are some of the insights that you have through the work that we've done through the time we've been apart, but also through developing the Lover's Journal, that you think would be particularly beneficial for people who are in long distance relationships?
I would say the first thing is communication and like learning like what is going, because it's going to take work. That is just going into it and just acknowledging that, we're in long distance relationship, let's make I'm even gonna just say it out, like let's make a list of the things that we could make to bond. And that is like even setting a time to talk. Like it can't just be like, I'm just gonna call you and I expect you to pick up. It's like we need to talk Monday, Wednesday, Friday at this certain time, so the other person really knows when to call or when they should be answering the phone. I think there's like a lot of people go into it like, oh, they're my partners, so whenever I call, they should be available. But doesn't mean just because someone is your partner, like they need to be available to you at all time when you need them.
Right. Yeah.
So that would be like my first thing is like being clear about what happens and when, like what time is the communication happening.
Interesting. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed is what are the things that actually keep the through line of your relationship there when you're not together? Well, is that when we see each other every day, there's sort of like there's check-ins. If something isn't working or whatever, it's like we kind of know pretty early on and we deal with it. If you're apart, you don't have those little things. So, a relationship is growing together with somebody. And it doesn't mean you're growing like together, like you're intertwining, but in the like 5-ish years that we've been together, you've grown and I've grown. And so we've both been growing, and we check in and we help each other along the way. What do you do when you don't get to observe that regularly? It becomes an intentional thing. What do we talk about when we're on the phone? Yeah. What do we do? What are those things that we do to actually build? Because I think if the normal building blocks of life or of a relationship aren't there, like we go out on date nights, we go on little walks together, we do these things. What do you put in those places? And I think that's one of the things that I found interesting about the people who actually have reached back out to us about the Lover's Journal was on Sunday nights, we get on the phone and we do this together. And it becomes this anchor to be like, what is going to be the through line? Because when we get together again, or when we see each other, we actually have this thing that we've been building. So what are these pieces that you're building? I think that's becomes really important because you actually want to continue to help each other grow and be helped to grow from the other. So that's what I think.
Nice.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So there was a criteria. You wanted to move to Kenya. And that was pretty easy because I was ready to make a big shift like that. But it's not always that easy for two people who are in a relationship where their homes or their works are far away. And at some point, if it's like, oh, we want to bring our lives together, what becomes the criteria for who moves and what the consequences of that are?
So I don't know if you remember this, but when we were moving to Kenya, you almost got a job in China.
Oh, yeah.
Remember this?
Well, I almost got a job. I was asked if I wanted the job, and
Correct.
I had to consider whether or not I would take it.
So it wasn't, if you wanted to move, you could have had the job. And I think what we had to consider was like, you were making pretty good money. You were going to be making really good money. B, what was I going to do in China? I had to find something to do. But I think what was the determining factor was I had dreamt of moving back home for years. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the determining factor. And this was just for you, this was just a job, it was a job that was going to pay well. You had been to China. It wasn't like you had dreamt of one day living in China. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, do I really want to give up my life, my dream of moving back home because you got a job that was really well paying? And at the end of the day, I think we decided you know what, money, we're going to make money another time. But this time we're going to go with that.
That could have very well been. Yeah, that's pretty much the way I remember it. But that's exactly what I mean. For us, it was easy. For me, it was I didn't have a job that I loved. I didn't have family in a place that I did have family, but nothing I felt bonded to. So you did have something you felt really called to do. That made our decision very easy. I knew always that particular year that we left was, since I was, for the last 10 or 15 years at least, I had kind of known that was going to be a year that I was going to either, I was going to uproot my life in some way or another. So it was not out of the question. But that's not that easy for other people.
No, it's
someone's
not.
A lawyer in New York and someone's a doctor in Los Angeles. Who moves? Doctor in Los Angeles has aging parents that they want to take care of, and New York lawyer has kids from an earlier marriage. Who decides now? What do you think are some of the criteria for that?
I have no idea. You have to consider, what even if there are kids involved? Do you, I've thought about it, because right now for us, moving is really easy because there are no little kids involved. But when you have little kids in school, it's you have, I'm just do you uproot them from the school? You also have to consider, do you take them to a different school? They are also human beings with needs. They have friends. At the end of the day, the two people have to do what they think is best. And sometimes maybe I don't even think they know what's best.